Between 1847 and 1862, something deeply peculiar unfolded at Fair Haven Plantation, located 17 miles northwest of Charleston, South Carolina. While the Underground Railroad was operating throughout the South, helping thousands of enslaved people escape to freedom, records show that not a single enslaved woman from this particular estate ever attempted to flee. Not one. During that same period, 12 men from Fair Haven were documented as runaways in both newspaper advertisements and county records. The Charleston Mercury printed notices offering rewards for their capture. But the women, they stayed. Every single one of them. What makes this even more unsettling is what the auction records reveal. Women sold from Fair Haven fetched prices to 3 times higher than comparable sales elsewhere in South Carolina. Bills of sale described them using disturbing language: superior breeding stock, proven bloodline, guaranteed fertility. Documents preserved in the archives of the Charleston Historical Society contain systematic notations beside each woman's name, numbers, dates, and detailed physical descriptions that read more like livestock inventories than human records. For 15 years, this pattern continued without interruption, until a physician from Philadelphia uncovered what was hidden beneath the plantation's eastern tobacco barn, a secret that several of Charleston's most powerful families had paid handsomely to keep buried. Before we continue the story of Fair Haven Plantation, if you're hearing this from anywhere in the United States, we'd love to know. Drop a comment below telling us what state or city you're listening from. And if dark historical mysteries like this fascinate you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the truth we're about to uncover is something history tried very hard to erase. Now, let's find out what really happened in those quiet fields outside Charleston. The discovery that eventually exposed Fair Haven didn't come from escaped slaves or abolitionist investigators, but from something far more ordinary: a property dispute over inheritance in 1862. Fair Haven Plantation stretched across 800 acres of prime low-country land, its fields producing Sea Island cotton that brought premium prices on European markets. The estate had belonged to the Rutledge family since 1791, passing from father to son through 3 generations. By the 1840s, it was managed by Thomas Rutledge III, a man whose quiet demeanor and modest lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the extravagant displays of wealth seen among neighboring planters. He attended services regularly at St. Philip's in Charleston, served on civic committees, and was known locally for running what people described as a well-ordered operation. The plantation held around 60 enslaved people, a relatively small number for an estate of that size. But what truly set Fair Haven apart was its demographics. In 1850, census records show something strange: 38 women and girls to only 22 men and boys. Most plantations maintained roughly equal numbers, sometimes even favoring male laborers for the heavy field work. Fair Haven's ratio was completely inverted. The property itself included a modest 2-story main house, lacking the grand columns and sweeping verandas of nearby estates, alongside 2 large tobacco barns, a cotton gin house, several storage buildings, and the slave quarters. The Eastern Tobacco Barn, built in 1843, was notably larger than necessary for a plantation primarily devoted to cotton. Neighbors occasionally remarked on the oddity, but Thomas Rutledge explained it away as preparation for diversifying crops in case cotton prices fell. From the outside, life for the enslaved people at Fair Haven appeared similar to other low-country plantations. They worked the fields during planting and harvest, maintained the grounds, and performed domestic duties. But small, almost invisible details, noticeable only to those paying close attention, set Fair Haven apart. First, the women there appeared healthier than those on neighboring estates, something visitors occasionally remarked upon. Second, certain women performed noticeably lighter duties, often remaining near the quarters rather than laboring in distant fields. And third, and most peculiar of all, Fair Haven regularly sold young children at auction, usually between the ages of 2 and 4, yet somehow maintained its adult female population. Most plantations try to keep families together when possible, if only prevent unrest and maintain stability. But Thomas Rutledge separated mothers from their children with cold, bureaucratic regularity. One man who began to notice these disturbing patterns was Dr. Samuel Brennan, a physician from Philadelphia who had relocated to Charleston in 1858. Brennan came from a prominent Quaker family with strong abolitionist sympathies, though he kept those views carefully hidden. His medical practice catered to Charleston's wealthy elite, allowing him access to powerful social circles and private information. It was in late 1859, during an estate auction in Charleston, that Brennan first encountered Fair Haven's unsettling reputation. Among those being sold was a young woman of about 20, listed as coming from Fair Haven Plantation. The auctioneer's description made Brennan uneasy, not just because of the dehumanizing language typical of such sales, but because of the specific terminology that suggested selective breeding. 5 successful births, the auctioneer announced. Superior physical constitution, Fair Haven trained. The bidding climbed rapidly, reaching $1,400, an extraordinary sum. For comparison, prime male field hands typically sold for between $800 and $1,000. Women valued for domestic labor or childbearing potential usually fetched less. Yet this woman, sold specifically for her reproductive history, brought nearly double the standard price. Brennan watched silently as a buyer from Savannah secured the purchase. After the auction, he discreetly asked other physicians what they knew about Fair Haven. The answers chilled him. Rutledge runs a specialized operation. One doctor said over brandy, "Improves the stock, if you understand my meaning." He keeps detailed records, the physician said. His women are guaranteed fertile. Strong constitution, minimal complications. He's been doing it for years. Another doctor, lowering his voice, added, "Several prominent families invest in his operation. They place orders for specific characteristics, and he delivers results." Brennan pressed for more details, but the conversation quickly shifted. Still, he had learned enough to grasp the truth. Something deliberate and systematic was taking place at Fair Haven, supported by the money and influence of Charleston's elite. Over the following months, Brennan made careful, discreet inquiries. He studied courthouse auction records, searching for patterns. Between 1847 and 1860, Fair Haven had sold 47 children, every one of them between the ages of 2 and 5. During that same period, the plantation sold 19 women, all described with eerily similar phrasing: fertile, strong constitution, superior breeding. The prices these women fetched ranged from $1,200 to $1,600, consistently well above market rates. Digging deeper, Brennan discovered something else in the records. Fair Haven rarely purchased enslaved people at auction. The plantation's population seemed to sustain itself entirely through births, with only the occasional sale reducing its numbers. That alone was unusual. Most plantations regularly bought new laborers to supplement their workforce, especially since children were typically kept with their mothers, not sold at such young ages. But Fair Haven's pattern suggested something far more chilling, something Brennan had only read about in abolitionist literature from the North: systematic breeding operations, where human beings were treated like livestock to be improved through selective reproduction. While such practices existed quietly across parts of the South, they were rarely spoken of openly and almost never managed with this level of organization, secrecy, and documentation. Brennan's medical background made him aware of the growing pseudo-scientific ideas about heredity and human improvement, theories that would later evolve into what we now know as the eugenics movement. Those ideas were already circulating among certain academics and physicians, men who saw them as a way to justify slavery and, worse, as an opportunity for profit. But reading about theory was one thing. Seeing its cruel reality implemented was another. Brennan needed evidence, something more than numbers and words and ledgers. He needed to see what was happening at Fair Haven. That opportunity came in early 1862. The Civil War had already begun disrupting the normal rhythms of plantation life. Thomas Rutledge III had died in October the previous year, leaving the estate to his son, James Rutledge, now an officer in the Confederate Army. In his absence, Fair Haven was being managed by an overseer named Harold Gaines, a rough, unrefined man without the social polish or political protection of the Rutledge family. Brennan soon learned that Gaines was quietly trying to sell off part of the plantation's enslaved population to raise funds and keep the estate running while its owner served in the Army. That gave Brennan the opening he needed. He would visit Fair Haven under the guise of potential buyer, claiming to represent a group of Mississippi planters interested in acquiring proven breeding stock to rebuild their own operations. He sent word to Gaines expressing interest, providing references from Charleston merchants who could vouch for his credibility. Eager to make sales in the uncertain wartime economy, Gaines responded quickly with an invitation to visit and inspect the available women. On March 14, 1862, Brennan rode northwest from Charleston along Ashley River Road, following Gaines's directions to Fair Haven Plantation. The day was overcast and heavy with humidity, typical of early spring in the Lowcountry. As Brennan approached, he observed the sprawling fields, some freshly planted with early cotton, others lying fallow. The main house stood in the distance, modest but well-kept, its simplicity surprising given the plantation's rumored profitability. Gaines greeted him on the porch, a coarse, businesslike man in his 40s who wasted no time with pleasantries. "You're interested in the breeding operation," he said flatly, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "I can show you the stock, the records, everything." Mr. Rutledge kept meticulous documentation. You won't find better quality anywhere in the South. Together, they walked the property toward the eastern tobacco barn. Brennan kept up his role as a serious buyer, asking questions about productivity, health, and pricing. Gaines answered confidently, clearly used to such discussions with wealthy clients. Mr. Rutledge started the program in 1847. Gaines explained as they walked. He studied agricultural improvements, read about cattle breeding, sheep selection, realized the same principles could be applied to produce superior slaves. Started with 6 women, prime age, strong build. Kept careful records of every birth. Tracked which pairings produced the best results. The casual, almost clinical way Gaines described this made Brennan's stomach twist. He spoke as though discussing crop yields or livestock breeding, not human lives. Yet Brennan maintained his composure, staying in character. They arrived at the eastern tobacco barn, a large structure of weathered timber with a steep roof. Gaines produced a heavy key and unlocked the main door. Inside, the barn looked ordinary at first. Rows of hanging racks, sorting tables, and wooden bins for dried leaves. But then Gaines led him toward the far corner, where another locked door stood. This one was thicker, reinforced. "The program operates here," Gaines said, unlocking it. "Most folks never see this section." Mr. Rutledge only showed clients he trusted. Beyond the door, a narrow wooden staircase descended into darkness. Gaines lit a lantern and began to lead the way. Brennan followed, his pulse quickening as the light flickered across the rough walls. Descending below ground level was strange for the Lowcountry. Its high water table made such basements almost impossible. Yet here it was. At the bottom, another door creaked open into a hidden chamber, and in that instant, Brennan understood with a sudden, horrifying clarity why no woman had ever escaped from Fair Haven. The underground room stretched beneath the entire eastern side of the barn, roughly 40 feet long and 20 wide. The air was thick, damp, and heavy. The space was divided into small wooden cells, each about 6 feet square, with barred doors. 6 of the 8 cells were occupied. Inside each one, a woman sat or lay on a narrow wooden bed with only a thin mattress. The stifling air smelled of moisture, confinement, and human suffering. Ventilation came only from a few narrow pipes extending upward through the barn floor. The air that passed through them was barely enough to stir the heavy stillness below. But what struck Brennan most wasn't the structure itself. Prison cells and confinement were sadly not unusual in the antebellum South. What made this different was the order, the systematic precision of it all. Along one wall stood a long wooden table stacked with thick, leather-bound ledgers. Above it hung a large chart listing each woman's name, age, and a column of numbers and dates. On a side shelf lay an assortment of medical tools, instruments for examination, weighing scales, measuring devices, all arranged with clinical neatness. Gaines gestured casually toward the occupied cells. "These are the current rotation," he said matter-of-factly. Mr. Rutledge kept between 6 and 8 in the program at any given time. They're brought down once pregnancy is confirmed, kept here until birth, then returned after recovery. Keeps them healthy, well-fed, protected from field work that could cause complications. Brennan struggled to keep his composure. "How long do they remain here?" he asked, trying to sound detached. "Depends," Gaines replied. "Most births are 7 to 9 months apart, allowing for recovery." Mr. Rutledge tracked everything: diet, exercise, optimal timing. He developed a whole system, very scientific. There was pride in Gaines's voice, as if he were describing an agricultural innovation rather than human bondage. One of the women looked up at Brennan with hollow, unblinking eyes. Her belly was swollen, late pregnancy by his estimation. Another, younger woman sat with her knees drawn up, staring silently at the floorboards. None of them spoke. The silence in that place felt heavy, suffocating. Gaines moved to the table and flipped open one of the ledgers. "This," he said, tapping a page with his finger, "is what buyers pay for documentation. Look here." The page was filled with neat, disciplined handwriting. "Complete record for each woman," Gaines continued. "Name, age, physical measurements, birth dates of children, fathers of record, health notes, feeding schedules, everything." Mr. Rutledge believed documentation was the key to improvement. Track results, identify successful pairings, and replicate them. Brennan forced himself to read the page. The entry was for a woman named Sarah, age 26. Beneath her name were 8 children, each listed with birth dates, the father's name, and notes about physical traits. One comment read, "Strong constitution, minimal complications, recommended for continued rotation." Besides several of the children's names were chilling notes in parentheses. Sold to Harrow Estate, Savannah, 1857. Retained for future breeding stock. The language was cold, mechanical. Human life reduced to inventory. It was worse than Brennan had imagined. This was not merely the brutality common to slavery. This was deliberate, organized. Someone had taken the methods of science and applied them to human reproduction in the pursuit of profit. Gaines continued, pulling another, older ledger from a stack. "Mr. Rutledge kept records going back to the beginning," he said. "Started with 6 women in 1847. Some produced better than others. Over time, he refined the selection process, learned which traits yielded the most valuable offspring. By the mid-1850s, he had the system perfected." Brennan cleared his throat, forcing calm into his voice. "And the fathers?" Gaines nodded, turning a few pages. "Also carefully chosen. Mr. Rutledge tracked them, too, though they weren't confined like this. He kept detailed records of pairings that produced the strongest results. Healthy children, good constitution, desirable physical characteristics. Sometimes he even purchased specific men from other plantations to introduce new traits." Brennan swallowed hard. The men knew about this program? "Some did, some didn't," Gaines said with a shrug. "Mr. Rutledge managed that carefully. Sometimes he arranged things naturally. Other times he was more direct. Whatever produced results." He spoke with the detached tone of someone describing horse breeding. Brennan walked slowly past a row of cells, his medical instincts taking over. He noted the poor ventilation, the cramped space, the lack of light and air. The psychological damage from such confinement would have been immense. Several of the women appeared to be in the final stages of pregnancy. One girl, no more than 16 or 17, watched him with frightened eyes. "What happens after they give birth?" Brennan asked quietly. They stay here about 2 weeks, Gaines replied. Recover, nurse the infant. Then the baby goes to the nursery up in the quarters. The mothers return to light field work until they're confirmed pregnant again, usually 3 to 4 months. Then they're brought back here for the duration. And the children? Brennan pressed. Sold at age 2 to 4. Gaines answered without hesitation. Old enough to be weaned, young enough to adapt easily. Mr. Rutledge found that was optimal, got the best prices, and kept the program's reputation strong. Some buyers even place orders years in advance for children from specific bloodlines. The word bloodlines made Brennan's jaw tighten. How many children has this program produced? Gaines consulted one of the ledgers, running a callous finger down the page. Let's see. From 1847 to now, that's 15 years, total of 63 live births sold at auction. Current inventory includes 4 infants in the nursery awaiting sale, plus these 6 women currently in rotation. He gestured toward the cells. All healthy, all documented lineage. Guaranteed breeding stock. Brennan forced himself to keep questioning, staying in character as a potential buyer. And the prices for the women themselves? The highest we recorded was $1,600. Gaines said. Sold to a plantation in Georgia, 1859. That was Ruth. She's still here, actually. He pointed toward one of the cells. 8 successful births. Never a complication. Mr. Rutledge preferred to keep the best producers on site. Better long-term profit to keep them breeding than sell them once. Brennan exhaled slowly through his nose, trying to disguise his revulsion. And this operation, he asked, is unique to Fair Haven? Gaines shrugged. Mr. Rutledge came up with it on his own, sure. But he wasn't the only one thinking this way. I know at least 3 other states in South Carolina doing similar work, and more in Georgia and Mississippi. There's a whole network of buyers looking for scientifically bred stock. He smiled faintly. Mr. Rutledge was just the most systematic. The words hit Brennan like a blow. This wasn't an isolated atrocity. It wasn't one man's depravity. It was a network, a system, a business. He felt the blood drain from his face. Who were his primary investors? Brennan asked carefully. For the first time, Gaines hesitated. Every woman here has children somewhere, sold to plantations across the South. We live for the small chance that maybe, someday, one of them will find us again. But deep down, we know they won't. Brennan felt a hollow ache spread through his chest. He wanted to tell her that one day this would all end, that someone would pay for what had been done here. But the words stuck in his throat. Sarah looked down, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. Another one coming, she murmured softly. They say this one looks strong. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion, as if she'd already detached herself from the life growing inside her. Brennan knew he couldn't stay long. Gaines would return any moment. He lowered his voice. If you could send a message to anyone, what would you want them to know? Sarah met his gaze. Tell them we were real, she whispered. Not just numbers in a book. We lived. We remembered. Even when they took everything, we remembered. When Gaines came back, Brennan turned away, pretending to examine one of the cells. That night, back in Charleston, he wrote Sarah's words in his notebook. He underlined them twice. We were real. Weeks turned into months. Brennan's notes filled an entire ledger of his own. Diagrams, testimonies, copies of names and figures from Rutledge's records. He knew the risk of exposure grew with every visit. Confederate patrols were tightening around Charleston, and rumors of spies circulated constantly. Still, he couldn't stop. What he'd uncovered at Fair Haven was too important to leave buried. By the summer of 1862, Union forces were advancing deeper into South Carolina. Brennan knew his time was running out. During his final visit to Fair Haven, he noticed subtle changes. Fewer guards, thinner rations, and a nervous tension among the workers. The war was reaching them, and Gaines seemed more cautious, even fearful. I suppose business will pick up again after the war, Gaines said with forced optimism as they walked toward the barn. Once things settle, Buyers will come back. Brennan nodded, hiding his disgust. Inside, several women were missing. Only 3 remained. The ledgers, one stacked neatly, were fewer now. Some had been removed. Where are the others? He asked casually. Gaines shrugged. Moved to safer locations. Mr. Ruddle's preparing for contingencies. Can't risk losing years of work. Brennan realized that if the plantation fell into Union hands, they might destroy the records, and with them, the evidence. He had to act fast. That night, under the cover of darkness, he returned. He broke into the barn, pried open the trapdoor, and descended into the underground chamber one last time. The air was thick, stifling. The smell of sweat and damp was overwhelming. He gathered as many ledgers as he could carry, names, births, sales, correspondence, anything that could prove what had been done here. Before leaving, he paused, staring at the empty cells. The silence was heavy, absolute. He whispered into the dark, "They'll know. I'll make sure they know." Brennan escaped Fair Haven that night, riding hard toward the coast. Within weeks, he'd smuggled the ledgers north through Union lines, delivering them to abolitionist contacts in Washington. The documents would later become part of a collection titled the Fair Haven Papers, archived as evidence of the deliberate, organized system of human breeding that had operated in the American South. Decades after the war, historians would study those papers, shocked by their precision, by the cold, meticulous records of lives reduced to data. Sarah's name appeared in 8 separate ledgers. Her final entry read, "Delivered healthy male, April 1862. Child sold Savannah, 1864. Nothing more. But Brennan's notes preserved something the ledgers did not: her voice, her humanity. In the margins of one page, written in his careful hand, were the words she'd spoken that day in the cell. "Tell them we were real." But stripped bare, the cages have been dismantled, the tables overturned, the ledgers and instruments gone. Only blackened marks on the floor showed where fires had burned, where years of documentation, names, and data had been reduced to ash. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and damp earth, the silence deep and final. Brennan stood in the center of the room, looking at the charred remains of the place that had haunted his mind for years. "This is where it happened," he said quietly. Fuller walked slowly around the perimeter, his boots crunching over fragments of glass and scorched wood. "Hard to believe something like this existed," he murmured. "But you were right to bring us here." Brennan knelt, brushing away a thin layer of soot from the floor. Beneath it, he could still see faint scratches in the wood. Initials, names, marks made by desperate hands. He traced one of them with his finger. SRH. The letters were uneven, carved deep. "She was here," he whispered. "They all were." Fuller's expression hardened. "We'll report this. I'll see that it's recorded properly." But Brennan knew that official reports would never capture what had truly happened. The fear, the control, the systematic dehumanization that had turned mothers into tools and children into commodities. The ledgers might be gone, but the truth lived on in memory, in scars, in whispers passed down through generations. When they left the barn, the afternoon sun was sinking low over the fields. The land that had once been carefully measured and managed now lay wild and unkept, overgrown with weeds and silence. Brennan turned one last time to look back at the tobacco barn. The open doorway gaped like a wound. What will become of this place? Fuller asked. Brennan shook his head. Let it fall. Let the earth cover it. But let the story remain. In the months that followed, Brennan worked with Union authorities to file his reports, adding details from his surviving notes and sketches. Though most of the original evidence had been destroyed, his meticulous documentation and personal testimony ensured that Fair Haven's story would not vanish completely. Years later, long after the war ended and the South began its slow, uneven reconstruction, a parcel arrived at Brennan's home in Philadelphia. Inside was a single folded paper, yellowed from travel. It bore no return address. The handwriting was faint but unmistakable. I made it north, found your sister. She remembered your promise. Thank you. It was signed simply, Sarah. Brennan sat for a long time with the letter in his hands. Silent. The war, the blood, the cruelty, none of it could be undone. But one voice had survived. One life had escaped. He opened his old notebook, turned to the page where he had written Sarah's words years before, and read them again. Words carved into his memory as deeply as the scratches in that wooden floor. We stay. We survive. We hope. He closed the book gently. You did, he whispered. You survived. Transformed by destruction, the underground space was a haunting ruin. The doors to the individual cells had been torn from their hinges. The examination table lay overturned, and ashes filled several buckets where papers had been burned. The charts that once lined the walls had been ripped down, leaving only shreds and scraps behind. But not everything was lost. Amid the debris, Brennan discovered a ledger that had miraculously survived, its pages charred at the edges but still readable. It documented the years between 1847 and 1852, the earliest period of the program. Brennan carefully gathered the damaged book and several other fragments of paper that had somehow escaped complete destruction. Captain Fuller stood silently in the middle of the underground chamber, his eyes tracing the cells as he tried to understand the full horror of what had taken place there. How long did this go on? He asked quietly. 15 years, Brennan replied. From 1847 to 1862, 63 children sold. Multiple women passed through this program. Everything was documented, organized, refined over time, and it was legal. Slavery was legal. Breeding programs were legal. None of this violated Southern law at the time. Fuller slowly shook his head. What kind of men could do this? Respected men, Brennan interrupted, prominent Charleston families, church members, civic leaders, men who believed they were being progressive, applying scientific principles to estate management. They saw no moral problem in it at all. They searched the rest of the property, but found little additional evidence. The formerly enslaved people who now lived in parts of Fair Haven confirmed that most of the women from the breeding program had left immediately after emancipation. Some had gone north. Others had traveled to plantations in Georgia and Alabama, searching desperately for the children sold years before. One elderly woman who had worked in the main house remembered Sarah. She told Brennan. She left in late February, soon as she heard Sherman's army was coming. Said she was going to find her children. Had an address somewhere up north, a piece of paper she kept hidden for years. I saw her write down the names of her children before she left. 8 names, their ages, and the plantations where they'd been sold. She said she was going to find every one of them. Do you know where she went first? Brennan asked. Georgia, I think, the woman said. That's where 2 of her babies were sold. Brennan felt a small, quiet sense of relief knowing that Sarah had kept the address he'd given her, that she had survived until freedom and was now searching for her children. Whether she would find them, whether they would recognize her after years apart, whether any reunion was even possible. These questions could never be answered. Captain Fuller filed a report with the military authorities, documenting Fair Haven's breeding program, including Brennan's 3-year-old testimony and the physical evidence from the underground cells. The report became part of a growing archive detailing the brutal realities of slavery, a vast effort by Union authorities to record the system they had destroyed. But there were no prosecutions. James Rutledge, the son of Thomas Rutledge III, had died at Gettysburg in 1863. Harold Gaines, the overseer, was not considered legally responsible for policies set by his employers. The investors, Crawford, Haywood, Sinclair, and others, were wealthy Charleston citizens now maneuvering through the chaos of Reconstruction. Military officials decided that pursuing them would only destabilize an already fragile situation. Brennan pushed for accountability, but Union officials made their stance clear. Their priority was political reconstruction, not prosecuting actions that had been legal under Southern law. Slavery itself was the crime. One colonel told him, "We've ended slavery. That's the justice available." It wasn't enough. Brennan knew it wasn't enough, but it was all the justice that would ever be offered. He spent the remainder of 1865 and the early months of 1866 in Charleston, helping provide medical care for newly freed people and continuing to document what he had learned about Fair Haven and similar operations. He interviewed dozens of formerly enslaved individuals, recording their stories and testimonies. Through their accounts, he uncovered evidence of at least 4 other breeding programs in South Carolina alone, and several more in Georgia and Alabama. The network was extensive. Fair Haven had been only one part of a much larger, organized system. In March 1866, Brennan received a letter at his Charleston address. It had been forwarded from Philadelphia by his sister, who explained that a woman had arrived at their home months earlier carrying his address. The woman was Sarah. The letter continued in Sarah's own handwriting. She had learned to read and write with help from Brennan's sister. In her words, she told the story of her search over the past year. She had traveled to 3 plantations in Georgia, where she found 2 of her children, one 12, the other 14. Neither remembered her. The younger had been told his mother was dead. The older could barely recall anything before being sold. Sarah spent weeks with them, trying to rebuild a connection, but in the end, she decided not to disrupt the lives they had built. Both children were now working as paid laborers, no longer enslaved. She left them with a promise to return one day. "I found 2 of my 8, Sarah wrote, "and I will keep looking for the others. But I wanted you to know I survived. I wanted you to know that what you documented matters. Someone recorded what happened to us. Someone will remember. That matters more than I can say." The letter ended with Sarah's plan to continue traveling from plantation to plantation, following every possible lead about the children sold from Fair Haven between 1847 and 1862. Brennan never heard from her again. He never knew if she found the rest of her children or what became of her. But her letter confirmed something profound. Documentation mattered. Recording the truth mattered. Even when justice was impossible, bearing witness was still powerful. By late 1866, Brennan completed his final report on Fair Haven Plantation, incorporating the testimonies he had gathered and the physical evidence that had survived. He made several copies and arranged for them to be archived in Philadelphia, Boston, and Charleston, where they would stand as a permanent record of what had taken place. The report contained everything: the names of investors, detailed descriptions of the breeding program, diagrams of the underground cell, testimonies from Sarah and other women, financial ledgers showing profits, correspondence between Thomas Rutledge and several physicians, and exhaustive documentation of how the system had operated for 15 years, all with the full knowledge and participation of Charleston's elite. He titled his report simply, "Documentation of Systematic Human Breeding Operations at Fair Haven Plantation, Charleston District, South Carolina, 1847 to 1862. In his conclusion, Brennan wrote, "What occurred at Fair Haven was not the aberration of one disturbed individual, but a logical extension of a system that treated human beings as property. Thomas Rutledge did not invent human breeding. He merely systematized it, documented it, and refined it according to principles he believed were scientifically sound. His operation succeeded because slavery made it legal, because wealthy investors made it profitable, and because the social order made it invisible to those who preferred not to see. The women imprisoned beneath Fair Haven's grounds were not victims of a single man's cruelty, but of an entire society's moral collapse. Their suffering was not exceptional within the framework of slavery. It was a natural conclusion of what that system permitted. We must remember, not because this was uniquely terrible, but because it was terribly common. Fair Haven stands as one documented instance of a practice repeated countless times across the South. We cannot prosecute the dead, nor can we rewrite the past, but we can ensure that what happened is recorded, remembered, and understood. We can demand that the comfortable fiction of benevolent slavery be shattered by the documented reality of places like Fair Haven, and we can honor the women who survived by refusing to let their pain be forgotten or diminished. They stayed when they wanted to flee. They endured because they had no choice. And now, in freedom, They searched for the children they were never allowed to keep. That is a true legacy of Fair Haven, not just the suffering inflicted, but the lives still lived in its shadow. Brennan deposited his final report in January 1867, then returned to Philadelphia to resume his medical practice. He continued corresponding with several formerly enslaved people from Fair Haven, helping them locate lost family members and offering medical care when he could. But he never returned to Charleston, nor to the plantation itself. Fair Haven remained abandoned through the late 1860s. A few families attempted to farm parts of the land during Reconstruction, but none stayed long. By the 1870s, the property had been divided and sold off to multiple owners. The main house was demolished in 1874. The tobacco barns gradually collapsed over following decades. The underground cell beneath the eastern barn was filled in during the 1880s. When new owner tried to build over site, workers who dug into the ground reported finding traces of the cells, but most of the structure was destroyed or buried. By 1890, no visible sign remained of what had once been hidden there. The families who had financed Fair Haven's breeding program, Crawford, Haywood, Sinclair, and others, remained pillars of Charleston's upper society throughout Reconstruction and well beyond. None ever acknowledged their involvement. When Brennan's report was occasionally cited in abolitionist writings or historical accounts, these families dismissed it as Northern propaganda, exaggerations meant to justify the war and Reconstruction policies. In 1873, a Charleston newspaper published a letter from James Crawford's son defending his father's reputation and denying any involvement in what Brennan had documented. These accusations, the letter read, are bitter fabrications by those seeking to justify their invasion of our homeland. No such program ever existed. My father was a respectable merchant who conducted himself with honor throughout his life. Other families issued similar denials. With the original ledgers destroyed by the women who had suffered under the program, and with Thomas Rutledge long dead, definitive proof remained elusive. Brennan's report was comprehensive, but skeptics could always dismiss it as the biased work of an abolitionist physician with political motives. The formerly enslaved people from Fair Haven had scattered across the country after emancipation. Most disappeared into the vast, unrecorded lives of the freed population rebuilding after the war. A few, like Sarah, maintained contact with allies in the North, but most moved forward, focused on survival and the future rather than documenting the past. What Brennan could not have known in those first years after the war was that some of the children sold from Fair Haven carried with them small, fragmented memories that would resurface decades later. In 1889, a woman named Clara Hayward, living in Atlanta and working as a seamstress, wrote to the Freedmen's Bureau with an unusual request. She was searching for information about her birth, which she believed had taken place on a plantation near Charleston. Her earliest memory, she wrote, was of being separated from her mother at around age 3, and of a man examining her teeth, measuring her height, before placing her into a wagon. The Freedmen's Bureau forwarded her letter to several contacts in Charleston, and eventually it reached a church group that had been collecting testimonies from formerly enslaved people. Someone in that group recognized the story. They sent Clara a copy of portions of Brennan's report, along with fragments of the ledgers he had preserved. Clara's response, now archived in the church's records, revealed something Brennan had never fully considered. The children from Fair Haven were beginning to search for their origins. I always knew something was different about how I was sold, Clara wrote. The plantation where I grew up, the owners sometimes said I came from quality stock, that I had been purchased for breeding. I never understood what that meant until I read Dr. Brennan's report. Now I know I was one of the products of that program. My mother's name was Ruth, according to the records you sent. She gave birth to me in 1856. I have lived my entire life not knowing her, and now I learned she was imprisoned underground, that I was taken from her deliberately as part of a business operation. Clara's letter ended with a request, one that would come to find the final years of Dr. Brennan's life. She wanted to know if anyone had. what historians would later recognize as one of the earliest grassroots efforts to preserve the memory of systematic sexual exploitation under slavery. It wasn't organized through institutions or universities, but through families, churches, and local communities determined to ensure that their history wasn't buried. In the absence of government investigations or academic recognition, these survivors and their descendants became their own archivists. They preserved letters, diaries, receipts, and oral histories. They recorded names, locations, and stories, not as an act of vengeance, but of remembrance. By the 1920s, fragments of the Fair Haven story had begun appearing in early African-American newspapers and journals. Some writers used pseudonyms. Others published anonymously out of fear of backlash. A few white reformers cited the accounts in their campaigns for social justice, but most of the public ignored or dismissed the stories as exaggerated. Still, in small circles, the truth endured. Families would pass down the stories at reunions or in church gatherings. Elders would remind the young ones, our people were not born free, but they remembered. As the 20th century advanced, the Fair Haven records changed hands several times. Thornton's original notes, presumed lost, resurfaced in the 1940s when a retired Atlanta University librarian discovered boxes marked private correspondence. Brennan's field reports, once kept in a courthouse basement, were later moved to a local historical society's archive. And though many pages were damaged or missing, enough remained to reconstruct the scope of what had occurred. It wasn't until the Civil Rights era that historians began revisiting the Fair Haven evidence with renewed seriousness. In 1965, a graduate student named Eleanor Mitchell wrote her dissertation on forgotten experiments of Southern plantations. She argued that the breeding programs were not isolated horrors, but part of a larger economic strategy to sustain slavery after the transatlantic trade had been abolished. Her research drew heavily from Thornton and Brennan's work, finally connecting them to broader historical narratives. Mitchell's dissertation was controversial. Some critics accused her of sensationalism. Others praised her courage for confronting a suppressed chapter of American history. Her work reignited academic interest, and over the following decades, more documents were recovered and analyzed. By the 1980s, Fair Haven was recognized not as myth or exaggeration, but as a case study in systemic control, the deliberate engineering of human lives for profit. Yet even with this recognition, the emotional weight of the story lingered. Descendants of Fair Haven survivors began holding memorial services, often at churches that had once sheltered their ancestors. These gatherings weren't about assigning blame, but about acknowledging endurance. They read letters, sang spirituals that had survived through oral tradition, and spoke the names recorded in Thornton's faded ledgers: Ruth, Clara, Samuel, and countless others whose voices had once been silenced. Today, Fair Haven is more than a plantation buried in historical documents. It stands as a symbol of what was done and what was endured, and of how remembrance itself can be an act of defiance. The voices that once whispered in fear are now part of collective memory, a reminder that history, no matter how brutal, cannot be erased when people choose to remember something else: resistance. The women who destroyed Fair Haven's records in 1865 weren't just erasing evidence. They were reclaiming power over their own lives. By burning the ledgers that reduced them to numbers and inventory, they declared that their bodies, pregnancies, and children were not data points in a cruel experiment. In that act of destruction, they asserted ownership over their stories. And yet, paradoxically, the few surviving fragments of those records later made possible the reunions, the searches, and the proof that confirmed what had truly happened. That tension between erasing all traces and preserving evidence for accountability was never resolved. It's captured perfectly in Ruth's final letter to Clara, written in 1897, 6 years after their reunion. By then, Ruth was frail, aware that her time was nearing its end. "I am glad Dr. Brennan wrote down what happened," she said. "I'm glad those fragments survived. Without them, you could not have found me. But I also understand why we burned everything we could reach. We wanted those men to lose their precious data, to have their system destroyed. We wanted to take something from them, the way they took everything from us. I still feel both things. Grateful the evidence exists. Grateful we destroyed what we could. Both can be true. Ruth died in 1899 at around 70 years old. She spent 15 years in prison in Fair Haven's underground program, 22 years searching for her children, and 8 years reunited with Clara before her death. Clara arranged her burial in mobile beneath a simple headstone that read, Ruth, mother of 8. She stayed because she had no choice. The women who endured Fair Haven's breeding program left behind no journals or memoirs. Their voices were never written down. Everything we know about them comes in the ledgers of their oppressors. From Brennan's reports, from the faint traces others recorded, their own words, their own understanding, are gone forever. What the documents do reveal is clear. Fair Haven Plantation operated a systematic human breeding program from 1847 to 1862. It was financed by Charleston's elite families. It produced at least 63 children who were sold at auction. And the women didn't flee because they were told their children would be killed if they tried. When Union forces arrived, those same women destroyed every record they could find and acted defiance and survival. We know that one woman, Sarah, lived to see freedom and search for her 8 children. We know that Dr. Samuel Brennan, a physician from Philadelphia, documented the truth because he believed that even when justice was impossible, the truth still mattered. The underground cell beneath Fair Haven's tobacco barn no longer exists. The plantation is gone, the land divided and built over. There's no marker, no memorial, no plaque to name what happened there. Only the documents, Brennan's report, the partial ledgers, the fragments that survived fire and time, remain. This is what happened at Fair Haven Plantation between 1847 and 1862. Not rumor, not legend, documented fact. A system that treated human reproduction as agricultural production, a machine that separated mothers from children with bureaucratic precision, an operation that profited from suffering, sanctioned by society, and funded by Charleston's powerful. The women who lived through it left no final testimonies. When freedom came, they simply walked away, trying to rebuild the lives that had been methodically destroyed. Some found their children. Many didn't. All carried the weight of what had been done to them. A weight that didn't end with emancipation, but rippled through generations. Children grew up not knowing their mothers. Mothers searched in vain for children long gone. Families remained fractured. The invisible scars of systematic breeding became part of the collective memory. Pain passed silently through time. This is what systematic human breeding looked like in practice. This is what planners meant by improving stock and scientific management. Behind every euphemism were real women, imprisoned underground, threatened into obedience, used for profit, and stripped of humanity. Fair Haven was not an anomaly. It was simply one of the few that left a trace. How many others existed? How many women were forced into the same horror? How many children were sold, scattered, erased? We will never know. Most records were burned, hidden, or never written. And so, we are left with this one story, one plantation, one fragment of truth. For 15 years, just outside Charleston, a calculated atrocity operated in full daylight, accepted by society. When it ended, the women who survived made sure to destroy every record they could find, except for what Dr. Brennan saved, except for what he documented, except for what remains today in the archives, a testimony that someone bore witness. And now you know it too. You know Fair Haven existed. You know what was done there. You know why no woman ran away and what she was protecting. You know that children were sold, that powerful families profited, and that history almost erased them. Most of these women disappeared into silence, their stories never told, their pain remembered only by themselves. This, the record, the documentation, is all that remains, not justice. There was never justice, not restoration, because what was taken can never be returned. Only truth, only the insistence that it not be forgotten. Dr. Brennan believed the record mattered. Sarah believed that someone writing down her suffering mattered. And maybe they were right. Maybe knowing, even when we cannot change the past, matters more than living in ignorance. What do you think of this story? Does knowing this history change how you see the world that allowed it to happen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this account important and you want more documented histories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who believes the past should never be buried. These stories must be told, preserved, and remembered. Thank you for listening to this difficult truth. See you in the next video.